Ryan, thank you for coming on tonight and filling in for Jeff Lutz. He is out of range. He's not able to get anywhere close to a Zoom tonight. So, it's only on paper right now regarding Tesla, but Elon's time and his 100 million or so investment into the Trump campaign only made him $15 billion in a single day.
Yes.
Not to mention the possible perks of being right in the ear of the most powerful man on earth. I mean, that might be worth something.
I think it's worth something. I think it's worth a lot. Even
Now,
just avoiding things like them killing a pay package is worth it.
just like something like that.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So, how much of the run up in today's Tesla price number by 288 or whatever? How much of that do you think was just the picture of him standing there as the kind of other VP
Hmm.
in the picture with his entire family and with Vance and that whole thing? How much of the run up was just the fact that he is now basically got that kind of close relationship?
The inner circle. Yeah,
Yes.
I think probably about, you know, 30% of
Wow.
that, yeah, of that, yeah. And then the rest is the fact that the positive developments were suppressed because of the risk of the inverse, not
Right.
just being positive, but that a Harris administration could have increased and stepped up the problems, the lawsuits, the other things, the harassment of his companies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you're right. Okay, so let me get your impression of what happens with the IRA legislation. Do you think it goes away? Do you think it gets modified? Do you think it stays the same? Do you think it happens quickly? I mean, what is your scenario with regard to that legislation?
I think that it will get modified or taken away for the vehicle portion
Mhm.
in order to satisfy the union and the other stuff like that and the ICE car makers, right? So politically, you know, getting rid of it for that part would have um, support and needs to be done by the midterms or definitely by the next election, right? Even
Oh,
if
so you
Trump's not
don't think
running.
it necessarily has to happen? You don't think it'll necessarily happen in the next 6 months or something like that?
Several reasons why I don't think so.
Okay.
One is that it's not top priority, right? There's a lot of other things that they have to do that are more important than that, right? So and then if you have a really thin um, Republican House where it's like 3 or 4 votes, that kind of thing, it may not even be totally possible, right? So depending on how that whole thing plays out, it could be tough to get that kind of legislation if you have like support on the other side, right? Um, but like I said, it's politically important for the Republicans to do something to keep keep their Michigan and other support in that area.
Okay. All right. Do you think it matters to Tesla? Because Elon has always said he doesn't care about it. Do you think it would have a very big impact on Tesla's profits?
So long as they also, if they remove the EV part, they also remove the plug-in hybrid part, right? Then it's a level playing field and Tesla's fine.
Okay.
Um, and then I presume that they will keep the energy storage megapack part because that is needed to level the playing field with China. So it's an entirely separate thing. I expect nothing beyond that because they have to do something in order to get the US up to speed on fixed energy storage.
All right. So that really is a perfect segue into my next thought here. Do you have any hope? Larry, of course, gives me such a hard time on everything, of course. But I mentioned this to Larry the other day, and he's like, "No, Randy, this is you. This isn't Elon, the president." He says, anyway, I have this idea that Elon does recognize that there is a strategic necessity for about four things that the U.S. has not only an economic strategic, but also a militarily strategic requirement to be onshoring and getting the maximum we can possibly get with regard to solar, nuclear, strategic minerals, chips, and drones.
Mhm.
And that Elon will be in the ear of the president saying, we have to make sure that we are, you got 4 years. This has to be 100% done by the time you're done. We have to make sure that we are far and away on the path to being the top in all five of those areas.
Yeah, that seems likely and reasonable because the solar combined with battery part, which China is like, I don't know, 4 times ahead. Like they have half of the world thing. I think the US is at 10, 12% in terms of like solar, in terms of like a terawatt level installed and that kind of stuff or more. So um, you need to have all that done because it basically starts replacing oil. Because
Right.
if my transportation and other things and natural gas, if you replace that with electrical and solar powered, then just like having, being the world's top oil producer or competing with Saudi, that it becomes the new oil to a great extent.
Right. Right. And then nuclear, I know you're a big, you've studied the nuclear thing backwards, forwards, and inside out. I am a
Mhm.
huge fan, have always been a fan of getting
Mhm.
back into the nuclear area. Do you
Mhm.
think that Elon, I mean, we know Elon's a fan of nuclear. Do you think he'll also talk to the president about that?
I don't think he necessarily needs to talk about it. I think Trump and others are already well aware of it. I think the issue is that you need to get not just to starting to make them again in some number. We're now making, one a decade or something like that.
Right.
And then we're turning some back on or building them in, like 3 Mile Islands. Microsoft putting one back in. But back in the 70s, when we were making most of our reactors, we were, making about 10 a year,
Yeah.
right? So that's the level that China's at now, right? But the thing is, 10 a year for the 1970s, our overall power level in the 70s and 60s was, maybe half or 70% of what level we're at now, right?
Right.
So and we're going to be needing to double our power for for the AI intensive data centers that we'll need to have. So by 2040, we need to double. So if we go from like 4,000, 4,100 terawatt hours to 8,000 terawatt hours, then you're going to add 4,000 terawatt hours. You're not going to be adding coal. You're not going to be adding natural gas. So then it's solar and wind, and then wind has a limitation
Right.
because of no one goes to that, but there's a limitation on that. So then you look at solar and nuclear. Those are the only options at scale. Hydro, we already dam rivers. You're not going to be able to do that. So solar and nuclear. So for the first 10 years, until we get a mass production of nuclear power plants or the small nuclear, whatever, you have to mass produce it, make them in really large numbers and get up to really like 100 gigawatts or at least, 50 gigawatts per year,
Mhm.
which would be at our total number right now is 100 gigawatts, just shy of that, right?
Interesting.
So if we need to get to making um, everything that we do now at 50% or like that, we have to get to like 5 times, 10 times what we were doing back in the 70s, which is
Gotcha.
like 100 times what we're doing now. So to get to that means new technologies, make gigafactories for nuclear, right? So that takes some time to do. The technology is there, it can be done, but you have to go to that. Otherwise, if you're just talking about, do I make 5 reactors? Do I make 10 reactors? Even at the China level, the 1970 level, because we're going to be doubling every 20 years, you're not moving the needle. It's like, okay, I'm slop. It's going from, it wasn't going to go from like 15% down to 8% of total, down to 5%, and I'm holding steady, I'm slightly increasing. If I move the needle, I need to multiply it by some number. I need to go to like, if I go to 4x the energy overall, then I need to like 8x nuclear in order to get it to 20%.
You got it. Yeah. All right. And then some people are all, thinking that we're going to eliminate the CHIPS Act. I
Mhm.
thought that was the best piece of legislation that that Biden passed in the entire time he was in office. Now maybe there's another way to do it, but I know that we've just turned on the first the first fab
Fab. Yeah,
and
4 nanometer fab in Arizona. Yeah.
in Arizona. And it seems to me that it's a very, very good idea to onshore as much of this chip manufacturing as we possibly can, at least if it can be done economically, whatever tariffs or et cetera are needed to make sure that happens. What do you think?
Yeah, I would not think that Trump wants a job in the United States. He wants technology job in the United States. This is aligned with what he wants to do. So I see no reason for him to want to get rid of that bill.
Okay. All right. And then I'll throw in my favorite. I know I've had to convince you about drones, but do you think that we'll see anything happen in this, as a high priority? Because the drone thing, if we've learned anything in the war in Ukraine, is that drones are the new tanks. The tanks
Mhm.
are completely eliminated from the battlefield by these drones.
I think that there's some big companies like we talked like Swarm AI, Anduril, which are these kind of Silicon Valley super software makers adding AI into drones and stuff, and also changing the hardware of what they have. So they're already getting well underway. I just see them increasing the funding and bets for that. So yeah, it will be a bigger part of what's going forward.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, all right. So Dan Ives on Trump winning. Here's what he had to say. He says, it's a dream scenario for any Tesla bull. Boy, was it.
Mhm.
We could now be talking about a $1.5 trillion market cap for Tesla. He's sitting at only a trillion, so he must be going to change his what do you call it?
The
His
target price.
yeah, up to 100, what would that be? Up to
So right now we're at about $900 billion dollars, and that's at our 288, right?
yeah,
$900 billion dollars. So if we go to 1.5 trillion, so
yeah,
1 trillion would only be like 10% more.
right.
So that would be like, about 310, 320 or something like that. And then if we want to go to that other number, basically it's about all-time highs. We'd be looking at, the
Or
450.
450, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So he says, he goes on to say he will fast track autonomous regulation. So this is his major, and I've seen articles and I've seen him say it personally. This seems to be the key for him, is that he was worried, apparently, and he thinks the market was worried that the regulations could slow Tesla down, even if they had if they finally got to autonomy to the point where they could make it a robotaxi, that then they would have trouble getting it through California. They would have trouble getting it through other states. They would have trouble getting it through NISTA. But now that all goes away. And he says Tesla is now the most undervalued AI name on the market. And he also says he says that if you fast track robotaxi, then it moves his estimate of the rollout by a year or more. So I've drafted a bill. Okay, I'm going to send this is my bill that I'm going to recommend that Trump gets passed.
Mm.
Any vehicle that is designed with the intent to be driven without a driver must provide proof that the vehicle will only cause one accident every 500,000 miles or more. It is clearly impossible for regulators to test this, so the manufacturer must self-certify, which is normal in the auto industry. They normally self-certify these safety regulations. Any accident caused by a vehicle under the fully autonomous mode will be liable for the proportionate share of damages. There will be a limit of damages, however, per passenger of $2 million in 2025 that will increase based on inflation if there's any deaths. So what do you think, my bill?
Um,
It's
I don't
okay.
think it's I don't think it's necessary, and I think that it's
Necessary.
extra liability and risk. If Elon wants to do it, that's fine. I think particular metrics might need adjustment, but it's if it becomes as safe as we're expecting, which would hit that target, then it would not be um, harmful to Tesla because they'll be able to clear that hurdle. So.
And
Yeah.
so, and yes, all right. And so you're saying, so you think it's not necessary because Trump will be in charge of NISTA, and
Mhm.
he can put whoever he wants to running it, who can be
Mhm.
faithful to Elon. So therefore, it's a kind of an unnecessary addition.
Right, right. Also, Waymo's operating already, and they don't have that standard,
Mhm.
right? So it's adding extra regulations, which is something that Trump wants to get rid of. He wants to get rid of regulations,
Right.
right? So you're adding in extra regulation there, which, in the future there will be, way safer than that. So then it'll just be, a extra thing that's just clogging stuff up. So, I would think that they will be safer than Waymo. And so that should be sufficient because Waymo's on the road now. So if they're safer than Waymo, they've hit the standard that they've said is good enough, right? So that's what I expect to have happen, that they go with what's already been approved and exceed it.
All right. So we've seen Dan Ives thinks that the new stock estimate should be 450. I'm at 700 by the end of next year, not this year. Certainly have been saying 300 forever.
Mhm.
But now we're talking about the all-time high. I kind of said the all-time high would happen when we actually had Elon saying you can now sleep in the back seat while you're riding. What do you think? How do you now see, based on Trump winning, has that changed your view of the stock price going forward? And what do you think is going to happen in the next few months?
Well, I was hyper confident that this would be the result of the election. So that didn't change. I think if the opposite happened, then would have to reduce my targets. But my targets had assumed that this would occur. In terms of so the sentiment has changed.
Right.
We're up to 288 and can carry through to 300 just on momentum and that kind of thing. And so then it's delivering certain execution pieces. One would be completing the Shanghai Megapack factory
Mhm.
in Q4, so probably December, something like that. Actually ramping up the first line and doing it at China speed.
Right.
Do they start making them in high volume and they start installing them in high volume?
Mhm.
If those occur, then um, and then also that's in the quarterly earnings report where they say, hey, we turned it on, here's the capacity, here's the numbers. Then if they make analysts recognize that,
Mhm.
then the story of um, energy growing at 100 to 200% a year,
Mhm.
which would be the case if all four lines in the Shanghai factory, which people don't know, we've looked at aerial photos that show that the China Shanghai factory for Megapack is twice the size of Lathrop. So there'd be
Right.
four lines, and that would be 80 gigawatt hours. So that would mean if you get that fully ramped, you're at triple the production that we have now, which would mean instead of $1 billion of net income, because we haven't had full um, Lathrop Megapack production recognized. They're being made, but they're not having revenue recognition and stuff like that. If we have 40 and 80 gigawatts all in production, all fully revenue recognizing, then we're looking at $3 to $4 billion of net income per quarter just from energy. And if we start announcing more factories, so then just those things could play out in 6 months where it wouldn't be fully happening, but they recognize, crap, they have four lines. One or two are kind of getting up to speed here. It's going to start. So it's them, the market recognizing that's happening quickly. So that could be a Q2, Q3 thing where they say, oh, that is happening. We have this line that's growing fast and it's a scale that I'm talking about,
Mhm.
right? Then that's doubling the price of the stock, maybe even tripling just from that, because the earnings by the end of the year could be, fully doubling up, even if
Right.
cars did nothing. And then the recognition that, hey, this factory's been totally ramped and they can build another factory super fast. And then, they will say, okay, yes, what Elon said before, doubling and tripling the energy revenue growth and it being at 30% margin, all that kind of stuff. So
Right.
just the energy story getting fully clear, how long does it take that to be fully recognized by the market? I think it could happen in Q2, Q3, just of
Okay.
that. So that is getting us without anything from FSD. So if
Mhm.
FSD happens, then we had $340 million of profit or whatever from that last quarter, just because there was a lot of Cybertruck with FSD and that kind of stuff because they're foundation models. The
Right.
foundation models have all of that. If Q1, we have China saying yes, bringing the FSD, Europe say bringing FSD. China, I would expect the nearly 2 million Tesla vehicles that if it's as good or better than version 13, feature complete, then I expect 30-40% sign up. I expect 600,000 sales
Uh,
of FSD in China. So that
mhm.
could hit in Q1 or Q2,
And
right? And then all
and
the new,
nobody's got that in their numbers. You're
right?
all by
No one's got
yourself
that.
on that. I haven't
I'm
seen
all by
anybody
myself on
else.
that. Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
And then the other thing would be that if FSD is that great, and the only way to get FSD is to buy a Model 3 or a Model Y, in volume, then the fact that we have 1 million more cars that we can make means that all that demand hits. And then if you're suddenly making 200,000 extra cars a quarter,
right.
right? So you go from like 500,000 to 700,000, 800,000, then it's a huge impact on the bottom line and the growth thing and the growth story back. The analysts are not expecting Tesla to get to 2.6 million vehicles or 2.8 million vehicles until 2028 or something.
Right, right. Yeah, in fact, I think you and I are the only two that are talking about the increase in auto sales as a result of FSD being perfected.
Mhm.
Um, Everybody else talks about the FSD, the potential Robotaxi money, et cetera. But just the increase in the amount of hardware that's going to go out the door to me is a big, big number. Now,
Mhm.
people think there'll be more hardware out there because of the 2.5 and the Juniper, and I agree with that. But they're only using Elon's number for that of 2.3 million next year, where I think as you just pointed out, I think they'll sell out. Now I have one more part though that you didn't include, which uh, is I think just Elon being out there on those stages all over the Midwest uh,
Mhm.
and becoming a darling of the right will have an impact. It's like that's advertising, that's promotion of the
Mhm.
best because it's not on a TV screen. It's real promotion of somebody out there that you now like and you want to potentially buy into his company, you potentially want to help him in some way, or you're at least going to take another look at vehicles that you maybe didn't look at before. Do you think that's going to have an impact?
I could think it'd have a huge impact, and something that some people aren't thinking about is that I think more uh, conservative, more right-leaning politically people, they buy more trucks. So
Hmm.
that means the sales will be more Cybertruck. And Cybertruck is twice as expensive as a Model Y.
Right,
So if you get a flood of, say, an extra 200,000 Cybertrucks,
right,
then that's the equivalent of 400,000 Model Y. And you're
right,
getting more earnings and stuff like that. So the type of things that could be bought could
right.
have an even bigger impact.
All right. Okay, this is a complete switch in subject. It's another subject related to homeland security, as long as we were talking about drones. This is from Arts Technica. The director of the National Reconnaissance Office has a message for U.S. adversaries around the world. Wow. He says, you can't hide because we're constantly looking. This is according to Chris Scholesi, something like that, a longtime NASA engineer who took the helm of the U.S. government's spy satellite agency in 2019. He says the NRO is taking advantage of SpaceX Starlink satellite assembly line to build a network of at least 100 satellites and perhaps many more to monitor adversaries around the world. So far, more than 80 of these SpaceX made spacecraft, each a little more than a ton in mass, have launched on 4 Falcon 9 rockets, and there are more to come. He says a large number of these mass-produced satellites are what the NRO calls a proliferating architecture, will provide regularly updated imagery of foreign military installations and other sites of interest to U.S. intelligence agencies. Scholesi said that the new swarm of satellites will get us reasonably high resolution imagery of Earth at a high rate of speed. This is a significant change in approach for the NRO, which has historically operated a much smaller number of more expensive satellites, some as big as a school bus. The quote, we expect to quadruple the number of satellites we have in orbit over the next decade. And the NRO is not the only national security agency eyeing the constellation of satellites in low Earth orbit. The Pentagon Space Development Agency plans to kick off a rapid-fire launch cadence next year to begin placing hundreds of small satellites in orbit to detect and track missiles throughout the U.S. Or allied forces. The Space Force is also interested in buying its own set of SpaceX satellites for broadband connectivity. Whoa! So what do you think?
So, for people who don't know, the military um, satellite space program, as well as the spy satellite, the the spy satellite space program, um, basically those have always been over double the budget of NASA. People think, oh, NASA does all this stuff. The military space program is twice the size
See,
of NASA. And now a Space Force is going to be triple the size of NASA. So NASA is about 25 billion. They're at, 50 to 75 billion. Okay. Of the total like $1 trillion that we spend on military.
got it.
And the spy satellites that we've been putting up prior to this, you recall the Hubble Space Telescope?
Sure.
And so we had something called the Keyhole 7 satellites. So they had like, one, two, three, four, five, six, seventh one. Keyholes were basically Hubble Space Telescopes that were pointing down at Earth instead of
Nice.
pointing out into
Oh,
space. Yeah.
okay.
So the so not recently, a few years back, the military spy satellite guys gave two Hubble class telescopes to NASA to say, hey, we don't need these anymore. Turns out they've been making about like 27 of these things that were. So we had one Hubble Space Telescope, but we had 27 equivalent things pointing down at Earth. Slightly different optics because you're looking close instead of looking far. So then they said, okay, we're not doing that anymore. What are we probably doing? James Webb Telescope? Probably Keyhole 8. So like the new spy satellite became the James Webb, right? And again, they probably got like 15 or 20 of them things up there, right? So now they say, okay, now we're going to 100 and now we're going to 400 satellites. So we have 6,000, 7,000 Starlink satellites, each
Yes.
about 1 ton, right? So, or half a ton, but going up to 1 ton with the bigger versions. So SpaceX is mass producing satellites. They'll be mass producing. So far, they have 70% of all satellites up there. And then with this mass production, with the military stuff, they will have 90 and soon 99% of all satellites. If you think of the cars, Tesla cars, right? So we
Yeah.
make 2 million a year.
Right.
Each electric car weighs about a ton, like what 1.5 tons, right? And the complexity of it is not necessarily that far off of a space satellite. You have to do some extra stuff to, make it able to go into space, right? Each one of those low Earth satellites costs about 250K, roughly
Wow.
150K. And then the big ones that they'll be making maybe go up to like an 800,000, $1 million, million two, right? So kind of like a Roadster or something, or like a compact Tesla semi, just the front end of the drive thing, not the what you're pulling. So the complexity of the satellites they're making is not dissimilar from
Mm.
the complexity of electric vehicles, electric trucks that they're doing,
Mm.
right? And they can make 100,000 to millions of those. So with the Starship, fully reusable Starship, which will be able to launch 10 times as much and launch 10 times to 100 times as often, right? They'll be able to pop up 100,000 satellites, a million satellites in a couple of years, as opposed to 2,000 in a year, right?
Yeah.
And the mass production will be copying the mass production of cars. So we will be mass producing satellites like we're mass producing cars. And the cost will be, like I said, high-end car, like up to $1 million. If you're mass producing, maybe you'll bring it down to like back down to half million. You went up to 1.2 and you bring it back down to half million.
Right.
Anyway, so that's the entire change in philosophy that the military is going to have. It's like, holy crap, I can watch anything I want all the time. The fact that instead of having 20 of these really good satellites, the fact that I have 400, 4,000, 40,000, I can be constantly observing everything on Earth. Instead of like there was a movie with Harrison Ford, Jack Ryan,
Right,
where they were like, okay, I'm gonna get some terrorists in the desert. I'm retasking a satellite. I'm repositioning it using fuel and blah blah blah, and it's gonna go overhead at a certain time,
right.
right? That's what they say, like no more certain time. It's gonna be like just like
All
we have Starlink overhead all the time, 5 satellites overhead all the time. They'll have five and then 50 and then 100 overhead all the time.
so in comparison to any other country on earth, I realize, of course, that when you're talking about a nuclear war, it doesn't matter who's the biggest or who's got the biggest gun because it's mutually assured destruction. But outside of that, once we have, well, even now, even today, with that kind of ability to have a visual resource of the battlefields and of the opposition's weaponry, etc., adding in Starlink providing the number one thing that I'm not a student of war, but my limited understanding as a student, a little bit of a student of war, is that communications is everything. It's number one. It's more important than weaponry. That if you combine those two, the visibility and the communication, it kind of gives the United States an unsurmountable advantage for, I don't know, 25 or 30 years. I mean,
Yes. So we have a very recent example, because I am a student of war. That's a student in technology as well, but war too. So the example is the Israeli war with Hezbollah and Lebanon, right? So they did all the spying and stuff like that, and they knew where everything was, but they also did observational um, analysis of everything that Hezbollah, the terrorists, were doing. What they did was they had LiDAR, laser radar analysis of all the buildings. So they knew more about the building's construction and what was being put inside them
oh my.
than than a city planner in San Francisco knows about the building in San Francisco, right? So they knew, oh, you're sticking missiles and weapons and tanks or whatever inside of residential houses, right? How did they know where to hit all? It's because they were I'm looking, I'm scanning, I see the tread tracks going into wherever. I watch you build the building, I watch you shove the thing inside. So then I know exactly where to hit everything. I know where you take the launcher. So then when you when they clean up and they say, okay, now, oh, Hezbollah has 100,000 missiles and they have like 10,000 launchers. How can Israel possibly deal with all that? It's because I know where everyone is and I can blow them all up. So that goes to, that's the advantage of war. If I can see everything, I know where everything is, then I can blow it up, right? So you're
So,
only,
so if that's true, then everything that the UN and these members of the UN are saying about the destruction, this, horrific destruction of hospitals and residences and everything else, everything that they're saying is complete nonsense. It's a complete lie. Because they got to know. If you know it, they know it, right?
but you have with the UN. So basically, Israel had the ability to use laser radar to detect everything in Lebanon, Hezbollah, know everything they're doing, and then use the military to blow it up. So if the US, through SpaceX, Starshield, mass-produced spy satellites, can do the same thing globally, then they can again see everything and blow everything up. You asked about the UN. The UN does not have a military spy technology budget. They do adult peacekeepers and other things, but they do not have military capacity, so they don't monitor or keep control or occupy any forces. When they do put people in, it's the volunteer soldiers acting as cops.
Right. So, but my question was, wouldn't if you're aware of the fact that the US has this capability, and we've seen the actual videos of the buildings in 3D, so the UN then would know that this capacity, this capability exists. and
Mhm.
therefore that when the Israelis are blowing up residences, that they're blowing up residents because they know that they're being used for military situation, and yet they're, going on TV or whatever and saying, "Oh, they're just trying to, you know, they're not they're violating international rules of combat by hitting non-military targets," and they absolutely know that they're lying through their teeth, right?
Right, right. They would know that one, they would know from their own observation that they're hitting military targets. But then two, the Israelis are telling the US that they're hitting because they're allies
Yes.
and
Yes.
part of the protocol is that Israel tells the US we're doing this. They may not tell them beforehand because the US is leaking information
Right.
for whatever reasons. So they'll tell them as they're doing it or just after they did, hey, we did this thing, blow those guys up and it was all good.
Right, right, right. Okay. Yeah. All right. So that's really, I thought that was extremely interesting. I thought that it might be interesting to the folks in the audience because not only because it's interesting from a military aspect and in terms of the US, but also from the standpoint that it's SpaceX that's doing it. And that it's really a significant advance. And people are talking about how important Elon has become to governments around the world. And it's not
Just a
just,
quick announcement about that is
yeah,
that the U.S. military, Defense Department, Pentagon, announced that they increased their space satellite launch and space satellite military satellite deployment from about $900 million up to 13 billion.
wow.
Supposedly, there's a bunch of contractors. Okay, 16 different companies could be supplying launch, 15 different companies could be supplying satellites, except SpaceX is so dominant
Right.
SpaceX was applying all of it, right? So there's virtually nothing left for the other guys. It began, like I said, 90% of launch is SpaceX. 70% of all satellites of the US satellites is probably like 90%. So, it just SpaceX is really dominant on that and for the mass production. If you're going to do a lot of them, hundreds of satellites, no one else can do it except SpaceX.
It'll be interesting to see whether once Trump is in, he'll be able to unwind that Tennessee Valley Authority contract with regard to the landlines and go back to using Starlink again.
Mhm.
That would be a huge. I mean, it's not a big contract for SpaceX, but it'd be a huge savings to the U.S. government.
Yes, yes. Hopefully
Yeah.
those efficiencies will be done. And I think Elon may have some say in what gets done.
So Brian, because of our technical difficulties, Brian is out of time, so he is not going to go through the numbers with us. Brian, thank you as always for coming on. Very interesting tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, so let's take a look at where we are. Of course, I'm sure that many of you were watching and paying attention today because it was a pretty exciting day with the Dow Jones up 1,500 points, the Nasdaq up 544, the S&P up 146, and Tesla up 37. If you put that into percentages, that would be almost 3.5, well, more than 3.5% for the Dow, almost 3 for the Nasdaq, and 2.5 for the S&P, with Tesla up only 14.75%. In the after hours, Tesla has backed off just a tad, 0.63%. The Kathy Woods all did well today. The Magnificent Seven did pretty well. Mostly, I mean, Apple was down a little bit, Meta was down a little bit, everybody else was up, and the Kathy Woods were almost all up. All right, let's take a look at where the bonds, because we talked about the bonds. Bonds became a very big subject of conversation today because they jumped up so much. We are now at 4.435 with another 9/10 of a basis point in the after hours on the 10-year or the pre-market, I'm sorry. The 2-year continuing up a little bit also, but only 0.2%. So that is expanding that inversion the correct way. 3-month up though, 1.8 basis points, 2-month also 1.8. But those now are, as I mentioned this morning, getting very, very close to re-inverting the right way. We have got oil, which had gone up, which we surprisingly has actually continued to go up. I thought it would drop off a lot with the victory by Trump, but it is not. And so it's up 24 cents, 71.93 for Texas and 75.20 for Brent. Natural gas down a little bit finally. It's still sitting though at 272. Gold continuing to back off down to 26.62, down 14 in the pre-market, and silver also backing off 0.59% at $31.14. So that's both of those have come off quite a bit. Copper up 0.33. There was quite a bit of also conversation today about how commodities were falling after the Trump victory. You've got the dollar actually down now a little bit of profit taking, very small, almost unchanged. And the Bitcoin continues up, a grand total today of $6,000, up to 75,521. That will definitely be an all-time high in terms of the daily number. And people are talking about that it's happening for a number of reasons, not the least of which is Trump is supposed to be in favor of doing something with Bitcoin. We've got the pre-market on equities very, very lightly going in various directions. The Dow up $6, 6 points. The S&P future down 4.75 and the NASDAQ down 16.75. So basically unchanged, very close to unchanged across the board. Okay, that's all I've got for you tonight. Normal stuff tomorrow, as far as I know, with after the bell in the morning, followed by CERN Basher and then Bradford Ferguson. Should be a very fun day. Looking forward to sharing it with you. As always, it's been great talking to you.